So, welcome to the first YouTube version of Israel Explained. I'm not sure how often I'll be releasing these. I'll try every day, at least during the war, but we'll see. So, let's talk a little bit about where the war stands right now. So, there's been a lot of talk about how ideas can't be beaten, about how guerrilla groups can't be defeated, terrorist groups can't be defeated. Well, first of all, historically speaking, that's not true. We have several examples of that occurring. Russia against Chechnya, Sri Lanka with the Tamil Tigers, Turkey with the PKK, United States with ISIS, several other examples as well. And one of the main reasons that this is so often misunderstood is because there's a fundamental misunderstanding about Middle Eastern mentality. In the Middle East, there's a trend of going after the stronger horse, of following whoever the stronger power is. That's been going on since time immemorial. And the popularity of Hamas skyrocketed after October 7th for the simple reason that they brought success. And now that Israel is counterattacking successfully, we're seeing a split emerge between Palestinian society, or at least the society in Gaza, and Hamas. And so the more there's a sense that Hamas is losing, the less people will follow it. And if Hamas had more success against Israel early on, after the massacres on October 7th, Hezbollah and Iran may have been more tempted to join fully instead of symbolically, the way that they did. So when people say that the Israeli operation in Gaza is creating more recruits for terrorism, they're misunderstanding how this works. It's the organization that has the most success in fighting against Israel that gets more recruits. That's why it's important to have clear footage and imagery of Hamas losing, which is what Israel did today by showing those pictures of the Nukba terrorists from Hamas surrendering. So that's why I think that's an important move. Another thing that we should talk about is the dynamic between that and releasing the hostages. There was a lot of talk, and there still is, from the families of the hostages and people who want the hostages released, that there's a tension between the success of the operation and the release of hostages. But what we've seen in the first hostage deal is that the more pressure is put on Hamas, the more likely they are to start releasing hostages. The key to the hostage deal was 3-1 instead of 1,000-1, as it had been in the past. And already there's talk in Hamas, both in Gaza and in Qatar, of another ceasefire in order to release hostages. So the more Israel presses, the more likely Hamas is to release hostages at a reasonable price. Now, we're seeing right now, and this isn't really being covered by the international media as much as it should, that Hamas is reeling, in shock. They're in shock for two reasons. First, they didn't expect that after the ceasefire, Israel would push as relentlessly as it had, if it would even renew fire. It was considered, the common wisdom, I thought it too, that once you cease fire for that long, it's hard to rev things up, and that there would be more international pressure to stop. So when Israel not only went back to fighting, but also escalated by moving troops into Khan Yunis on the first day, that was shocking to Hamas. And once again, we're seeing their defense lines collapse in Khan Yunis the same way that they did in Gaza very early on. And once Khan Yunis falls, they don't actually have another stronghold of anything like that magnitude. So there's certainly a bit of panic going on there. Now, it's a while until Khan Yunis is taken. It's true that the resistance in Khan Yunis is not as strong as expected, but I'm sure Hamas has surprises up their sleeve, and that the fight there will be difficult. But it's already time to start thinking about the next step. The next step should probably Rafah. Rafah not always is a big city, but also that's where you have the border crossing with Egypt. So if Israel takes over Rafah, they'll be able to control the humanitarian supplies coming in. And if the humanitarian supplies coming in are going to be larger than they had been in the past due to American pressure, Israel will benefit greatly from two things. First, being able to control what comes in and what comes out. Searching the trucks that are coming in, because already arms have been smuggled in these trucks. And also being able to distribute the humanitarian aid directly to the Palestinian public. Now that's important for two reasons. First reason, we want to make sure the Palestinians don't have a humanitarian crisis. That's because we're good people. We don't want the Palestinians to suffer. That's not what this operation is about. And second, in order to continue to drive a wedge between Hamas and the Palestinian people. Because if Hamas is taking all the aid, and we've seen people of Gaza raiding Hamas supply depots, and Israel is handing out aid and making sure that they get it, that's another strike against the legitimacy of Hamas, which is already teetering on the brink. Also, we're having trouble with Egypt. Israel's having trouble with Egypt. They're worried that if a lot of Palestinian refugees come in, it's going to be a threat to their security. So Israel's ability to control who goes in and out of the border there would also be of tremendous benefit. Now, the operation is going better than expected, but the one of the main reasons that it was thought that it wouldn't go well after that ceasefire was because of international pressure. And there is international pressure, especially in the UN, and some countries in Europe are changing their minds from saying Israel has the right to defend itself to they should call for a ceasefire now. And that was predictable. But of course, what Israel's worried about in particular is about whether the United States gives it time to complete the operation. Now, in the talks that Blinken had with the Israeli cabinet, he told them that the way he thinks the operation should go, or the way he sees it, is that over the next month until sometime in January, Israel can continue with the same type of operations it's having now, although with the caveat that it needs to be more careful with protecting civilian life. And then in January, the operation wouldn't stop, but it would become more selective. So less of a full-scale military operation, more targeted raids, the kind of thing that's going on in the West Bank, maybe more intense than that. But today, the Deputy Security Council advisor, National Security Council advisor, said that there's no hard and fast deadline. And the truth is somewhere between those two things. The United States hasn't set a red line for when Israel needs to finish the operation, but it's definitely going to reevaluate depending on political pressure, depending on international reaction, depending on the level of casualties, and depending on Israeli success. Right? The more successful Israel seems in defeating Hamas, the more likely the Americans are going to say, okay, go and finish the job. If it looks like the operation is going nowhere, then it's more likely the pressure will come from them. And the same with the Arab states. Behind the scenes, a lot of Arab states, especially Saudi Arabia and Egypt, but others too, are hoping that Israel manages to defeat Hamas. But if they see that Israel is stuck in some kind of war of attrition, that's not good for them and not good for their internal stability. So they'll be watching to see how successful Israel is, not just how many casualties there are. And that's something they're not going to say, but that's something that's very important. So for all of those reasons, Israel has to keep the pressure on. Has to keep the pressure on so that Hamas collapses, so that the United States allows it to finish the job, so that it finishes the job as quickly as possible before international pressure becomes unbearable. So Palestinian society sees that Hamas is weak and that wedge continues to be drawn with it. And so the Arab states in the area back Israel from afar and don't start putting real pressure on Israel to ceasefire. Okay, so I hope this was helpful. I'm going to be posting this on YouTube and on Instagram. And if anyone has any questions they want me to answer tomorrow in my next update, leave them in the comments. And see you guys soon.